This is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Kichijoji, but a much quieter spot than last time. As I was editing the previous Critiquing Comics episode, I thought, duh, I mean, there must be rental places, rental office space around, because I've used some in Shinjuku for my Machigai English YouTube show to shoot that, but it hadn't occurred. Almost all of the major stations have some of this rental space around. So found one of those, and we're, what should I say, crowd noise free this time. No screaming kids, no carts full of stuff being rolled by, clattering by, so forth. So, Happy New Year. How are you doing?
Happy New Year. I'm all right. I went to Hong Kong for Christmas, and after that, I did nothing. I just relaxed. I mean, New Year in Japan is much quieter than it is in the States, so it's kind of the Thanksgiving of Japanese holidays. So yeah. I did it Japanese style.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
How about you?
Just working on podcast stuff. Machigai podcast, To the Bat Poles, Deconstructing Comics. I've just kind of been working on all three, plus some family time and a few other things, but mainly that.
All good things.
Yeah. Spoiled rotten by all the free time that I had the past couple weeks, but less than a week left before I'm back to the junior high kids. So, what we're doing here today, this is part 2 of our Tokyo Comics show's comics reading annual event, where the comics that we picked up at Kaigai Manga Festa and Comic Art Tokyo, we're reading them and commenting on them. So, first of all, one that we both happened to pick up independently of each other, called The Pig Sleep by Cory, McCallum, and Matthew Daley. And as the name implies, this is kind of a noir type of thing. When I picked this up, I was initially attracted to the art style, which is kind of, feels a little bit like a collage, and I'm not sure how I would describe this. Kind of like, a little bit like Samurai Jack.
Yeah, it has that kind of angular, kind of geometric style to it.
Although, reading it, I was less enthusiastic about the art style, or particularly the narration, not the dialogue, but the narration, and there's more narration than dialogue, is all handwritten. And scribbly handwritten comics I don't like.
Well, it's supposed to be from his notebook.
Right, but it just makes it a little hard to read.
It was, I have to admit.
I mean, I've seen comics that are supposed to give that handwritten feel, but in much smoother, almost unrealistically readable handwriting. But yeah, this was a little rough in places. And, well, just to give an idea of the story, the main character is Mr. Monitor, as indicated by the cover, who, I don't know, he looks kind of like a lizard, sort of. His head is sort of like, if you cut a circle into 3 equal pieces, his head is like the top of the circle. And so his nose really sticks out, but then his chin is like flat.
I actually had difficulty recognizing his head as a head when I first looked at it.
I did too.
It's very abstracted.
Mm-hmm. And I couldn't really figure out what he was. And actually, when I first picked it up, the pig sleep, I was expecting that all the characters would be pigs. But in fact, none of the characters are pigs.
Actually, the cops are pigs.
I figured that out after I read it a couple of times.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, the big reveal later on as he's trying to solve the mystery of some missing cops, the big reveal I found a little hard to understand. It's, as I kind of looked at it, okay, I see. So the cops were killed and gruesome things happened to them.
Actually, about that big reveal, without spoiling it, what is that? I mean, it looks like a bacon man. Yeah.
There's a man in the foreground who does look like bacon and seems to also be holding a strip of bacon. And then, what we see in the background are torsos of cops still in their uniforms. But the dialogue or the narration doesn't really explain what it is. He's relying on the art to get that across to us, and it kind of does, but not in a really clear, shocking way like I think it's supposed to.
Yeah, it's kind of like that shower scene in Psycho where it's graphic in some ways, but you never actually see a knife cut anything. It just kind of is pressed against her skin, and then there's black ink flowing into the shower drain, and it's like, okay, I guess she died, but we didn't actually see any hard stab wounds. I mean, these days you'd have like guts and blood flying all over the place, but it's abstracted enough that you can't tell exactly what it is. Yeah.
Right.
What did you think of the story? I mean, overall.
It was kind of interesting. I mean, some of the other that problem of over abstraction works against it in some other places, and also I felt like there were a number of cases of telling rather than showing. There's a lot that's in the narration that you can't see.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it either should have just been a novel, or the art should have worked harder to get the story across. That was kind of my overall take on it. What do you think?
Well, the art makes you work for it, definitely. I mean, I did like the style of it once I kind of got used to it, and some of the abstraction is kind of nice. But there are times when I'm just not getting it. And there are quite a few places where I had to kind of really kind of consider the page and reread it a few times before it really sank into like what it actually was. So that was kind of difficult. But curiously, this has one main story which is like 12, 14 pages, and then a couple of single page stories in the back. And I wasn't convinced by the main story. I thought the main story was kind of so-so. And there was one, I don't know if it's a typo or if the writer just missed, but says something here just didn't jive. And that's actually the wrong word. It's jibe with a B.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah, and it kind of took me out of what it was supposed to be. It's like he heard the lingo and didn't quite get it. There were also a couple of times where they kind of overplayed the lingo, where it seemed like the writer was repeating himself within a speech bubble just to get the point across when it didn't need to.
Well, and they're really pouring on the metaphors.
Yeah. Well, the metaphor is a shortcut to something else, but if you triple the metaphors for one thing it's supposed to describe, then you're not shortcutting anywhere. You're just making it confusing, or you're just playing in the language. And so there were a couple of points where I was like, this is a little bit off. The language is off. The story itself is super simple. I mean, it's heartbreakingly simple. And maybe that is okay, considering how abstract all of the pictures are. And so it kind of works to you on a couple of different levels than just story. But what I found was the short stories in the back, the single page stories, were actually a little more confusing and a little more interesting than the main feature. But I felt that the last one, the very last page, really kind of solidified my feelings about the entire book. It seemed to show something beyond just a simple here's a story. It kind of it kind of elevated the status of the character to something more than just a character to fit a story. It helped me realize the character as a character in its own right, rather than a tool of the story.
I see. Yeah, I think I might have been, either I didn't notice them or I got kind of scared away from these last few pages because they were so abstract. I just I'm looking at this and I'm not getting anything from it.
There are I think 4 one-page stories, maybe 6?
5.
5? Okay. And there were 2 in the middle that were so abstract to me. I just okay, we've got some sort of abstract story with abstract artwork here, and I'm not getting any of this. And it's 1 or 2 pages. I'm just oh, okay, I read it. I looked at the pictures. I did not get it.
Some of this lettering is really tiny.
Yeah. It wasn't impactful, those couple of stories, but the one which shows the beginning of Mr. Mortimer, Monitor, and the end of Mr. Monitor, which I thought were quite interesting and just a little bit meta.
Yeah, I'm not sure who's. Well, I guess McCallum is the writer. I think he's pretty good at these sort of Sam Spade metaphors, but just kind of uses too many of them at once. I want to read this one panel, which it's a third of the page, and the entire panel is writing on part of a notepad page. I pounded the streets for 2 days and nights, talking to every deuce I could find. My notebook was filling up with a whole lot of nothing, and I was getting nowhere faster than a snail race in January. No one knew a thing and had heard even less. The cops were keeping this quiet all right, as quiet as a feather fight in a pillow factory. These burbs were rough enough without every mug and mope knowing that the powers that be weren't. I think you didn't really need that word. The powers that be weren't. Would be a little smoother. But yeah, that one just has 2 metaphors, but there are others kind of scattered through, and it was a little more than it needed.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Just too much. Just cut to the chase.
Yeah, one or 2 of those sets the mood, but if you start feeling okay, get on with it, then it's too many.
Yeah. I think the artwork is a little too streamlined, and the writing is not streamlined enough. But somewhere in between, I kind of liked it. And I also want to just point out that I met Daley at the Comic Art Tokyo Festival. And he walked over to my table and recognized, this is the first time this has ever happened to me, but recognized that the shirt that I was wearing was a Fetus shirt. It wasn't totally open. It just
Fetus the band.
Yeah, it just had like one little Japanese kanji that was visible. And he said, "Oh, is that a Fetus shirt?" And I was like, "Oh shit!" And we had
You're one of my people.
Yeah, we had a lovely conversation for a bit, and he was a cool dude. He bought one of my books, and I picked up this book just to kind of see more of what he was about. And I do like his work, and him as a person, I also quite like. Even though our exchange was brief, it was for me very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When you watched Batman as a kid, you enjoyed the colorful heroes and villains, the text sound effects on the screen, the thrill of watching a heroic crime fighter escaping from death traps and taking down bad guys. But the show was devised to interest adults too. What did you miss as a kid? Sexual innuendo.
The penguin's too small for me.
Closeted gay characters.
I like that cape, Batman.
Freudian death traps.
Has the giant clam really swallowed Robin?
Police incompetence.
Bruce Wayne is a millionaire playboy. Hardly a secret identity for Batman.
Whether you're a kid or an adult, there's something to like about our favorite Caped Crusader. Tim and Paul dig for the deeper meanings under the Batmania every other Thursday. What's the podcast's name?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
Next, let's look at Alethia, Alethia, Chapter 1 by Kristina Stipetic. And I remember she had like a number of chapters out at her table at CAT. 7 or 8 chapters were out, I think. I actually was looking at her website today, and it has kind of a cool animation with a song to it. But I couldn't find anything on her site about how to get subsequent chapters.
Write her email.
Which, I think I will. I'm a little curious about what happens after this. Chapter 1, it centers on this female alien character who looks kind of like a dinosaur, and she's like the queen in this alien society, and she is relied on for reproduction, and she's laying eggs, but they're all workers that are coming out. And, she's under some pressure to lay the next queen, but she doesn't really have control over that. And then this apparently female robot falls from the sky, and there's some suggestion that this female robot could act as the queen, perhaps, and the actual queen is sort of like, I don't want to be queen anymore, but I hope that you're not going to be queen either. And at the end, the queen tells the robot, they're starting to think of you as a possible queen, you better get out of here. So she runs away, and that's the end of chapter 1. The art is kind of interesting. It's much easier to figure out what's going on than Pig Sleep. Not so abstract. It's full color. I thought it was fine. I felt like I guess I wanted a little bit more out of it. I'm not sure what exactly, but I don't know. I just felt like something was missing a piece somehow. I can't quite put my finger on it. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I felt the same thing. The thing that I felt it was missing was that everything seemed a little bit matter of fact. So this robot falls from the sky, and the queen says, "Okay, well, take her in and fix her." And it's so matter of fact. It's like there's no other idea of technology in any of the society that's set here. They all kind of look like organic people dealing with organic things. No robots in society, but yet they know how to fix this robot, and they immediately identify it as a robot that's fallen from the sky. So, and they do fix her, and the society getting anxious about the fact that the queen is not born a new queen. And then...
I guess I wanted a little bit more world building and a little bit more characterization.
Well,
that matter-of-factness.
The big reveal is that the queen decides she no longer wants to be queen, and then chops her own egg laying apparatus off, where it looks like it was mechanical. So we have a society of, I'm guessing, mechanical beings who are created by egg laying.
Yeah, I guess I was a little confused on that point, exactly what the tail was. But yeah, you're right, there are wires and stuff coming out of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, she lays eggs out of her tail, so when she cuts off her tail, there are, I guess, wires and gears and whatnot sticking out of it. Or I guess just wires, not gears. But anyway, it just seemed kind of odd to me, and it didn't quite have a sense of world building that it needed to be complete. And over the other chapters, perhaps that's expanded upon, but in this first chapter, it's not quite what it needs to be.
Yeah.
In observance of the mark Stan Lee and Steve Ditko made on pop culture history, we present Spider-Man 1963, a 13-part podcast miniseries available to our patrons giving at least $5 a month. The regulars of Deconstructing Comics and To the Bat Polls go issue by issue through Amazing Fantasy 15 and Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 12. A new episode every other Thursday. Also now available to $5 and up patrons, our 2-hour discussion of Nancy Sinatra's 1967 TV special, Movin' with Nancy, a historical document of 1967 in pop culture. Our special podcast includes discussion of song histories and meanings, personal reminiscences, humor, and more. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics and pledge at least $5 a month to get access to both Spider-Man 1963 and Tim and Paul discuss Movin' with Nancy. Your pledge helps us to keep all our free content coming, and we thank you for your support. Now back to Critiquing Comics.
So finally, we've got the latest issue of Square Comics, number 17, from Ian.
We should mention that Ian said specifically that he was going to bin all of these, and in fact emailed me to say, "Don't, I'm going to bin it. Don't review it." And I said, "No, man."
He had it available for sale. So
yeah, he had it available for sale. But what this was he at the beginning of the con said, "This is my best work, the best thing I've written. It is really good," referring to the punk story in this issue. This also has a backup, kind of a flip backup about Cobot, which we reviewed.
I think last year.
Yeah, and Cobot was good, and you can listen to that podcast if you are curious. It's still available as far as I know, but he wanted to remove Cobot from this other story and just have the one story by itself, and I think that's what he gave as a reason for binning his. He also talked about redoing some cover or something. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell what exactly he wanted to do. I told him a couple of times he was an idiot, but I don't think any of it took. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, he does probably listen to this, and he's been our Patreon supporter off and on. So
respect for the work that he does, but sometimes the artist doesn't know when to let it go. And I think in this case, he was fine with what he made the first time. He didn't need to remake it or recut it or re-edit it or anything. It's all good.
Yeah, well, I mean, anyway, even if he's going to publish it as a not flip over book with get Cobot separate like it was originally. I mean, if he's still planning to publish Square by itself, I assume it's going to be pretty much the same issue.
Yeah, well, I think he did say we could review this one, and if he didn't, well, sorry, we're reviewing it.
So yeah, I mean this. I assume, I haven't been checking his site lately. I assume that he's published these online and then is collecting them here like he normally does. And there are a few really short bits, like a page or two, and then a couple of longer stories. You mentioned Punk, in which he's talking about stuff that happened when he was a kid, how he and some others started publishing a magazine of their comics in Toronto, and became a little bit famous, and he ended up he got some actual fan mail, like letters from around town, and there was a girl who he ended up talking to on the phone a few times, and then he just sort of dropped her, and he feels bad about that now, and sort of ruminates about how things could have been if he had not just dropped her. And we all have regrets about how we did things in the past. I was interested in how he talked about that he had just repressed this memory for a long time, because I know I've repressed things that sometimes too. Maybe not things that I did, at least not that I can recall. Maybe those murders that I committed, I still can't remember them.
Yeah, I can't recall my repressed memories.
But there were some things that I thought were that happened that I had no control over, that I thought were really terrible, that I completely forgot about, and then years later something happened or somebody said something, and I was like, what, really? And then it kind of came back to me. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, we can do that sometime. And the other longer story is about also childhood and a friend who died apparently like in 9th, 10th grade. And then the shorter ones are, there's the very first story about when he was 20 and commuted to downtown, I guess, Toronto by train for school, and was afraid that he was going to be doing that for the next 40 years to a job that he hated. Instead, he's in Japan. And then a couple of kind of Japan-based stories about, one is a festival in Okinawa where there's what he refers to as the largest tug of war in the world. And part of the point of that seems to be that at the end, everyone pulls out knives to cut up the rope to make good luck souvenirs, and he feels like if it were in the US or Canada, somebody would probably get stabbed. Which, he might be right about that. I can't really imagine such a festival happening in North America. Mm. And I didn't quite get this one about the redundant vending machine. I don't know. Apparently this is true. There was a vending machine somewhere in Shinjuku.
Is it true?
I don't know. That, he says that it's functional in that it's full of stuff, and I guess it's refrigerating it, but there's no way to buy anything from it. You would think that whoever owns the machine would figure that out sooner or later. I'm not making any money from this. Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know. Apparently that's true. I'd like to know where that is.
He says it's in Shinjuku, but Shinjuku's a big place.
Yeah, and there are many vending machines there. But yeah, I mean, overall, I thought it was, the art is really nice, and it's an interesting read, as always, from Ian. What do you think?
Well, he said that this was his best work, and I have to say no, because it's not at all that this work is bad or somehow inferior to other works. It's quite the opposite. It's that his other works are just as good as this one. And to say that this is his best is to disqualify his previous work, which I think is not correct. This is good. And the introspection and criticisms that he has of himself, he thought about it and he put it on paper and he was very raw about his feelings. And I like the fact that even though he titles the first story Punk, as I was getting to the end, it's like, well, what does Punk have to do with this? And he even answers that at the end of the book, at the end of the story. And I thought that was nice. Everything was answered, and that's all that I ask about these stories, is that all my questions are answered.
Yeah, don't leave us hanging.
Yeah, and I thought it was very well done. It is good, but what was the one he did about being an English teacher?
I am an ALT.
Yeah, I'm an alt was also very good. This does not trump that. This does not trump that because it is shorter. And the levels of emotion that are evoked from I'm an alt are much higher than the levels of emotion from this. But they're both honest and they're both emotional, and they're both good. So to Ian specifically, it is not, especially in his case, that one work is somehow better than another, but they're all part of the same tapestry, and so we're not looking at the story and saying good or bad. We're looking at the artist himself and adding it to the overall understanding of who he is and what his work is about. So in that part, in that way, yeah, it's totally worth picking up, as is all of his work. And there's no difference between this one and alt and the one about funerals that he did a couple of years ago. That we when we first run into his work, it's all good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll link to all the creators' sites in the show notes. And we've still got this anthology that we haven't gotten to yet. Anthologies are kind of tough to deal with on this show, I think, especially when some of the stories are in Japanese. But maybe we'll get to that another time. And we still have a few electronic comics in the queue also. And if you'd like us to critique your work, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. So till next time, this is Tim.
Well, hold on a minute, man. I've got a few questions here.
Okay.
So, it's the first week of 2019. So, how's it going so far?
Well, I've had a lot of free time and I've done a lot of podcast stuff.
Okay.
So it's atypical.
Well, focusing on comics and the future of podcasting and just life in these realms. How does 2019 look for you?
Well. So I've got proofreading work coming up that's probably going to cause there to not be a podcast some weeks in this feed.
What? Again?
Hey, I got to make money somehow. And I'm not sure what's going to happen in March because I'm intending to go home and help my parents prepare to move. After that, it kind of depends on what my day job situation ends up being. So I really can't predict from April onward at this point.
Okay, but there's no quitting of the podcast, no ending of it, just a couple of breaks here and there.
Not so far.
Okay.
No.
Anything you want to accomplish this year, comics related or not?
Probably, but my mind is kind of muddy right now. I've got too many goals, and I'm trying to narrow them down, and that's my problem. Yeah. Also, some life stuff. Like, I started to think that I'm getting kind of old, and I need to figure out what I'm going to be doing in 10 or 20 years. Not sure how that happened, but
yeah. A couple of the kids at the university I work at asked me how old I was, and I said 48. They were like, 48? We thought you were 30-something. I was like, well, thanks. I guess I could pass, but what's the point of passing if your insides are actually 50 and
well, I've been starting to. I mean, I get the same thing. People guessing 10 years younger than I am, but it doesn't mean that I'm actually that age.
Yeah,
sadly.
This is a thing. When I was, I guess 10. Indiana Jones says it's not the years, it's the mileage. But I'm beginning to see that not play out for me. So I don't know about the years or the mileage. I mean, I guess the car still works if the engine turns over, but if you don't go anywhere, don't do anything, don't really have mileage there. But
the cars can sit in place and get rusty. So
yeah, well, I think that's what's happening to me. I'm getting rusty. And after a couple of years, a pile of pages emerges, and maybe it becomes a comic. All right.
Okay.
Well, and Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.
Check the show notes for more info on the comics we discussed in this episode. Nominate graphic novels published in 2018 to be chosen as Best of the Year. Visit popcultureclassroom.org/EGL-program for more information. The deadline for nominations is February 15th. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Coom and New Face Daryl talk about issues 38 to 50 of Alan Moore's 1980s run on Swamp Thing.